All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today I'll be answering some leftover listener questions, giving you my thoughts on this weekend's action between the Rams and Bengals. And later, I'll be joined by Solomon Wilcots of the NFL Network to talk about this Super Bowl matchup, as well as discussing a groundbreaking procedure to promote repair in terms of knee damage.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me, I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, and of course, the host of this preeminent Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Falcons is brought to you by GetUpside. You can download the free GetUpside app and use the promo code touchdown to get 25 cents back per gallon in cash back on your first tank. So, guys, I also want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. Of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, as well as now on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel and give us a like when you do. So today's episode is an interesting one because I had an opportunity to talk with NFL Network Solomon Wilcots earlier this week about the Super Bowl matchup, and he was on with Dr. Brian Cole, who works for the Chicago White Sox and the Chicago Bulls, the team doctor, for those respective teams to sort of promote a groundbreaking knee procedure. And we'll get into that later on today's episode. Before we get into all of that, though, I do want to give my own thoughts on this weekend's Super Bowl matchup between the Bengals and Rams and give my thoughts on, part of the reason why I wound up betting on the Rams to win the Super Bowl almost exactly a year ago. But before we get into all of that and talking about the Super Bowl, I do want to touch a little bit on Falcon stuff. And I have some leftover listener questions that you guys sent in last week that I was not able to answer on Friday's episode. So I want to sort of clear out the mailbag before we get into that and we get into the offseason. So our first question is two questions coming from Stephen A. His first one is, with the release of Matt Gano, what would you think about the Falcons bringing on someone like David DeCastro, now 2 years removed, and I'm assuming healthy, or Kelechi Osemele on a cheap veteran prove it type deal? And his second question is, I had asked about Davis Mills, a local product out of Stanford, who arguably was the second best rookie after Mac Jones this year. Given what he's shown, if the Texans reverse course and keep Watson, if they hire Flores, would you entertain, if you were a GM, a trade where we get Mills plus Cooks for Ridley, assuming he really wants out, plus, say, next year's second that could become a first based off of some performance metrics or starts? So to answer your first question, Steve, since both DeCastro and Osemele were coming off significant injuries, I'd really only want them if they were willing to sign for veteran minimum contracts, and I doubt that they would do so, especially given, the situation here in Atlanta. Both of those guys have made, I think on average like 8 plus 10 million or so every year for like the last, 4 or 5 years. And I think Osemele wound up playing on a very cheap deal with the Chiefs in 2020 before he got injured. But I assume he was doing that because he was trying to win a Super Bowl. He was trying to win a ring. And you wouldn't have that situation here in Atlanta. So I wouldn't necessarily be in on, two 30-plus-year-old guys that have significant issues in terms of injuries at this point in time. Obviously, beggars can't be choosers at this point when it comes to the Falcons and improving their offensive line. But I feel like you can get some younger guys in the primes of their career that are better options for you this offseason. To answer your second question, if you're saying, your offer is we're getting Mills and Cooks and we're giving away Ridley in next year's second, I wouldn't do that. Now, if you're saying that we're getting back a second that's a conditional, we're just giving up Ridley and we're getting Mills Cooks in a second, I would certainly think about that. But for me, like, Cooks, you're basically renting Brandon Cooks for 1 year on like $16 million. So he's actually going to be more expensive to have on your roster this year than Calvin Ridley is going to have. And while I didn't watch enough Texans football this past year to know enough about Davis Mills, I know he played fairly well at the end of the season, those last 2 or 3 games. I know he looked pretty good, but watching him last year at Stanford, he seemed like a career backup, low-level starter type of player to me. And so he does not look like a guy that I would be super enthusiastic about saying, okay, this is our Matt Ryan heir apparent type of player. Now, we may wind up taking somebody in this upcoming draft that isn't better than Davis Mills, but I would much rather roll the dice on one of these other guys that I feel like are at least coming into the league are probably better overall prospects. And I feel like there's a couple of guys that we should be in a position to get this in this upcoming draft that can bring a little bit more to the table than I thought Davis Mills was potentially bringing a year ago. But if this is the best offer that is out there for Calvin Ridley, like I can't sit here and complain about it and say, look, at least you're getting a day 2 pick that might turn into a first round pick next year, and you're getting something. You're getting a quarterback, you're getting a wide receiver. So it's not a terrible trade by any means, but like I would not be enthusiastically being like, oh, the Falcons won this trade. It just feels like, well, this is the best offer you could get, for Calvin Ridley, and it is what it is. So, that's how I kind of see it. Our next question comes from Ryan Helton at That Crazy YM. He asks, also, I know it's early in your process, but so far, are there any players in the draft you really hope lands with the Falcons in a certain round? And yeah, I'm not that far along in my process yet and may never be. I try not to be that guy that sits here and goes like, hey, here are the 5 to 10 guys that I really hope the team drafts in this round or that round or whatever the case may be. My perspective on the draft is basically a typical draft is going to produce anywhere between 50 and 100 good players. And you hope that the Falcons land like 4 or 5 of them. And, which ones are fairly inconsequential to me. It's just like, I will have some favorite prospects, but my process has changed over the years where it's like, I just want my favorite players to go to good teams. And oftentimes that's at the Falcons. And so like whether the Falcons land that player or the Colts land that player, it doesn't really matter to me. Basically, it's like as long as the Saints don't get that player, then I'm good. But if I was to sort of so far in this process identify one guy that I really do like, it's Ike Ekwonu, the offensive tackle / guard out of NC State. Hopefully he's there at pick number 8. Doesn't seem likely at this point in time that he will be. So we'll just sort of have to see. Our last question comes from Andy at Andy S. Gallagher. He asks, what is your favorite song? I don't really have one. I don't necessarily really engage that part of my brain that has a favorite song or a favorite movie. The last time I can actually recall thinking about what my favorite song might have been was like in 2008 when I was driving to a friend's wedding, and there was a song on shuffle. I think this was the iPod days. This is before, I had a smartphone at least. And like a song came on and I was like, to the girl in the car, I was like, hey, I think this is my favorite song. And that song was like Footprints by T.O.K. But I think, I don't think that's actually my favorite song. I just, at that point in my life, I was, at least for like that 3 months, the month and a half before and the month and a half after that, like I was obsessed with that song. So I guess something that was going on in my life that song resonated with me at that time. But, just having favorites of things, like ranking things is not something that I spend too much energy worrying about, whether it's football, whether it's other stuff. It's just like I like things, and if whether it's 1, 5, 10, who cares? Spending the amount of energy to try to distinguish it, and you like good music, you like good songs, and certain songs you like in certain situations. There's a song that I enjoy when I'm in the shower. There's a song that I enjoy when I'm laying down to go to sleep. There's a song I like listening to when I'm cooking or cleaning or something like that. music is for the specific mood and saying like, oh, this is my one song that is my favorite or whatever the case may be that applies to all those moods. And maybe again, that's just my over analytical part of my brain doing too much work. That's probably part of the reason why I don't engage it, because I have to overthink things. So I just say like, hey, there's like 25 songs that are my favorite songs or whatever the case may be. So I hope that it is a sufficient answer for you, Andy. I'm sure you were trying to read into my personality, and I gave you one way because I tend to overthink things. So that will do it for us on the Q&A portion of today's episode, and we will continue today's Lockdown Falcons by giving you my thoughts on this upcoming Bengals-Rams matchup and sort of some of the narratives entering this game, and talk a little bit maybe about some of the narratives that may emerge out of this game. But before we get into all of that, guys, I want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And of course, I always have a plug for what your second listen should be, and that is none other than the Locked On Bulldogs podcast, where Clint and Daniel are giving you the lowdown on all things going on with those Georgia Bulldogs, coming off their national title in football, as well as, college hoops and all that various things elsewhere in Bulldog sports. So check out the Locked On Bulldogs podcast on your favorite podcast platform, including on YouTube. So we know that the Super Bowl is coming up, and whether you're traveling to LA to watch the game, or you're traveling down the street to go to your friend's Super Bowl party, you got to put gas in your car, and you always want to find ways to save at the pump, and you can with a new app called GetUpside, where you get cash back with every gallon of gas you put in your car. There's no catch. It's all free. You just download GetUpside either in the App Store or on Google Play, and you can search from any of the thousands of eligible gas stations near you. You claim their offer, you fill up, they put money directly into your account, and you can cash out anytime, and you can get payments directly into your bank account. You can use PayPal, you can get them on gift cards. I like to get them on Amazon gift cards. And now when you sign up with GetUpside and use our special promo code Touchdown, you get a bonus 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. So don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Download the free GetUpside app and use our special promo code Touchdown when you sign up. That's GetUpside, promo code Touchdown, to start saving every time you fill up. So let's talk a little bit about the Super Bowl matchup. I haven't spent much time talking about it. This will probably be the only time I spend too much time talking about it. We'll have some thoughts probably Monday, reacting to the game and whatnot. But, as I mentioned before, and you've probably heard me say several times, about February 8th, I think was the date, 2021. I put in a bet at betonline.ag for the Rams to win the Super Bowl. And I think the odds were like 12-1 at that point in time. And, I felt really good after that Matthew Stafford trade that this was the piece that was going to unlock this team and get this Rams team back into the Super Bowl hunt that they were a couple of years ago with Jared Goff, largely due to knowing that even though they lost Brandon Staley and Raheem Morris was taking over that defense, that was still going to be a pretty good defense. Maybe not as good as it was in 2020, but still probably a top 10 defense. And then with Sean McVay and the success he had, getting him a quarterback that could really open up that offense, because it really felt like the last couple of years of Jared Goff, and especially in 2020, that offense was very limited on sort of the short and intermediate stuff. And that was something that they needed to put this offense over the hump by getting a more dynamic arm that Matthew Stafford would bring to the table. And so feeling like that was the last kind of piece that they would need to push them over the hump and get them back in the Super Bowl mix, and really challenge a team like Tampa Bay or in Green Bay or whatever the case may be. And obviously they made some midseason moves to only enhance their prospects with acquiring Von Miller and Odell Beckham. And it was a kind of an up and down season for the Rams. They were really good at the beginning of the season. They kind of went into a lull, similar to how the Bucs did a year ago, before they got hot down the stretch. And it wasn't a pretty playoff run for the Rams. They nearly lost, multiple games there, but they were able to figure out a way. And even though, like, we look at this Rams team, there may not be this sort of juggernaut that they were, at least in 2018, before the Patriots, showed them up in that big game. I think this team maybe has a little bit more resiliency because, they were able to pull off the win against the Bucs despite, sort of blowing that lead late. They were able to come back against the 49ers, a team that had beaten them 6 times in a row. So, I'm hoping that this Rams team, despite all their ups and downs and their inconsistency and not feeling as dominant as they should be, at least on paper, has a little bit more resiliency, has a little bit of that ability to respond to adversity, and so therefore will win me some money on Sunday evening. But they're facing a Bengals team that's also very resilient, if not more resilient than this Rams team. And it's funny because this Bengals team is truly like a Cinderella team. Like I was reading an article a week or so ago on Football Outsiders where they were talking about how the Bengals were like one of the lowest rated in their DVOA metric Super Bowl teams ever. I think the '08 Cardinals, the '03 Panthers were the only teams that were worse going back in their DVOA database that goes back almost 40 years. The '07 Giants, I think, were also like right barely ahead of this Bengals team. And some of that's owed to the fact that the Bengals got off to a relatively slow start and they were much better in the second half of the season than they were early in the season. And so, like, if you don't only counted from like I don't know, like week 10 on or whatever the article said, they would look a lot much better in terms of DVOA. But like, this is a team that I think I saw somewhere where they had 6.5 expected wins going into the season. The Falcons had 7 wins, so that they went into the season expected to be a worse team than the Atlanta Falcons. So that kind of tells you something. But they played really well, but it's not as if like when you look at some of those other bad team, quote, I use bad air quotes, bad teams. Obviously, you're not bad if you go to the Super Bowl. Those other sort of middling sort of teams, at least based off of their regular season performances that ultimately went to the postseason or went to the Super Bowl, like the '08 Cardinals, where Larry Fitzgerald got really hot and Kurt Warner went on this really strong run in the postseason. Jake Delhomme, people forget that Panthers team got really hot in the postseason. Jake Delhomme was putting up numbers alongside Steve Smith. You had, Eli going on the first of 2, really solid postseason runs. And I know the 2012 Ravens weren't on this list, but like they're the team I often think of like how did this team make the postseason? And it was largely due to a really impressive run that Joe Flacco went on in January. And while Joe Burrow has been good in this playoff run, he hasn't been like stellar like you would typically expect, and certainly not as good as some of those other quarterbacks that we just mentioned in their postseason run. But it's just like the Bengals are just resilient, and they took care of business to get the Raiders as many expected them to. Then it felt like the Titans kind of lost that game. Like if Tannehill doesn't turn the ball over as much as he did, like the Bengals don't win that game. They didn't play an incredible game. And then the Chiefs got up big, and then the Bengals came back. And it felt kind of like Mahomes kind of laid an egg there, starting off with that failed, late first half conversion. And then I know the Bengals made some second half adjustments with their sort of drop 8 coverage, but it just didn't seem like the Bengals were out here playing great football. They were just playing resilient. They were taking advantage of other teams' mistakes. And that's the thing that worries me about this specific matchup with the Rams, because again, going back to what I said, the Rams have been a bit of a roller coaster this season. And if they're making mistakes, and they've made mistakes in this postseason, the Bengals just seem to be that team that can take advantage of that. And so even when you look at those quote unquote bad teams that one that went to the Super Bowl, the Cardinals and the Panthers, the '03 Panthers, the '08 Cardinals, those Super Bowls came down to the final possession. Obviously, the '07 Giants won their Super Bowl. So this is a game that is very winnable by this Bengals team. But I'm curious to sort of see how it goes. We've seen so many of these Super Bowl matchups, last year being an exception, and then you probably have like the Seahawks Broncos game being another exception. But most of the Super Bowls come down. They're one possession games in the final 5 minutes of the game, right? It comes down to 1 or 2 possessions at most. And I expect this game to be one. And if that's the case, then the Bengals have just as good a shot as anybody to win it. If it's that type of close game, one mistake, one bad throw by Matt Stafford, he's been making a ton of them this season. That's all Joe Burrow needs, or whatever the case may be. So it'll be interesting to see sort of what are the emerging narratives coming out of this game on Monday. We'll probably wind up talking about them on Monday's episode, in addition to probably doing our first mock draft Monday. But that's where we'll leave my thoughts on this Super Bowl matchup, and we'll get some thoughts from Solomon Wilcots coming up as we wrap up today's episode. And he'll be joined by Dr. Brian Cole to talk about a groundbreaking new procedure that uses a person's own cells to repair cartilage in the knee. But in the process of talking about that, we'll also talk about this game. But speaking of this game, I do want to let you know that the super week. The super week of great content here on the Locked On Podcast Network has been brought to you by GetUpside. And of course, you can check out the Locked On Bengals and Locked On Rams podcast that have been in LA all week long covering this big game by subscribing to Locked On Bengals, Locked On Rams on your favorite podcast platform, including on YouTube. So we talked about my making a big bet on BetOnline a year ago. Why not make your own big bet today by heading over to betonline.net, where you can find more props, odds, and lines than ever before as we march towards this big game. But it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, all the way to your favorite Vegas casino games. If you want to bet on this game, of course, the Rams are 4-point favorites. But again, those resilient Bengals have everything it takes to sort of upset this Rams team and upend my year-long process of winning money on this Rams team. So if you want to make a little bit of money off of my misery or join me in my joy by heading over to betonline.net, don't wait and take advantage of all the amazing offers for the 2022 season. BetOnline, where the game starts. So guys, it's Aaron Freeman here of Locked On Falcons, joined by none other than former NFL player and current NFL collaborator with the NFL Network, Solomon Wilcots, and Dr. Brian Cole, who is the team doctor for various Chicago-based sports. They're here to talk with us a little bit about this Super Bowl matchup between the Cincinnati Bengals and the LA Rams, as well as a sort of breakthrough knee procedure that is, really helping a lot of folks out there with knee pain and whatnot, and we'll get some details on that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. But I want to appreciate both of you guys for joining me on today's show. How are you guys doing today?
Hey, we're doing great, and we're here at the site of Super Bowl 56. We're excited about the game. We're also excited about new technologies, right, to help people recover from cartilage repair damage to the knee.
Yeah, and I do want to touch upon that a little bit later because there are several players in this game that have had some major knee issues in the past, and I'm wondering how this sort of technology impacts that. But I do want to touch a little bit on the matchup, and I know, Solomon, given that you last played for the Cincinnati Bengals when they were last in the Super Bowl back in 1998, I guess you can sort of touch upon this a little bit, is sort of what does it mean for that organization to be back in the thick of things right now?
Yeah, it really does mean a lot for the Cincinnati Bengals organization, for the team and the town, right? Who suffered heartbreak some 31 years ago at the hands of Joe Montana when he drove down the field on us with 40 seconds remaining in the game. Still can remember him throwing the winning touchdown pass to John Taylor. It broke all of our hearts. But right here in my hometown of Los Angeles, California, there's going to be redemption this time around. I'm telling you, I can feel it. Because we got Joe Burrow, we got another Joe, right, playing for the Cincinnati Bengals this time, and we believe in Joe Burrow big time.
Absolutely. This matchup is interesting. I want to get your thoughts on it a little bit because everybody's been doubting the Bengals so far, and it seems like I know I was doubting them until the second half of that Chiefs game and whether or not they were a legit Super Bowl team. I think they've proven it multiple times. We've seen Joe Burrow get harassed quite a bit so far this season, including in the postseason. And it seems like Aaron Donald's a completely different animal. I'm curious to sort of see how you view that matchup in the trenches and whether or not sort of this is going to be the time where the Bengals offensive line does truly sort of break down.
Look, I can tell you right now, I don't know how the Bengals plan to block Aaron Donald. No one seems to be able to block Aaron Donald. And all season long, Joe Burrow has been hit, hurried, and harassed, but yet and still find a way to win football games. He found a way to come from behind 3 different occasions, down 14 points to the Kansas City Chiefs in a Week 17 win by the Bengals. You saw him come from behind 18-point deficit in the AFC Championship game to come back and beat Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. And you saw against the Titans, a guy that was sacked 9 times continue to get back up and still is able to come back and win football games. I think it's a testament to the confidence that he has in his own ability and his talents. What a real born leader he is. And when you look at the numbers, here's a guy that led the league in average yards per pass attempt. He led the league in completing 70% of his passes, even though he was sacked more than any other quarterback this season, but yet the guy still find a way to win. So this is what we call a guy who exceeds expectation. He's a force multiplier, and you cannot count Joe Burrow out, even though we know Aaron Donald's going to make his plays, but Joe Burrow will make his as well.
Now, you talk about him exceeding expectations, coming off a year where he got pretty beat up in his rookie season in Cincinnati, suffered a major knee injury. He's coming back and playing at a high level, obviously, sort of putting that Bengals team on his back, so to speak, and guiding them to the Super Bowl. You look across the field, you have two key receivers for the Rams that suffered some injuries to their knee in the past, Cooper Kupp, Odell Beckham. I'm curious where you guys sort of look at them and to talk about the thing that you guys are here to talk about with, recovery from knee injuries. Is it these injuries used to be sort of career threatening injuries back when you played, Solomon, but now it seems like the medical technology has progressed where it just kind of seems like, an ACL tear, that's no big deal. What are your thoughts on sort of the improvement in medical technology that has occurred over the last several years?
Well, clearly medicine has come a long way. And I'm joined by Dr. Cole, phenomenal orthopedic surgeon with the Chicago White Sox and the Chicago Bulls. He's treated a number of different patients, and obviously he can tell us a lot about the new MACI procedure, which is an innovative treatment to help with cartilage repair. Dr. Cole, you just heard him ask questions about, and no injury is the same, right? It changes from player to player, but help us to understand how MACI is helping players and athletes to recover from cartilage damage.
Aaron, your point is a great one, how we're seeing career-ending injuries on a weekly basis, especially in the NFL. And what's fascinating is what we see in these young guys who come out in the combine, maybe 40 or 50% of them have cartilage problems. Now, Aaron, just for your viewers or listeners to your episode, cartilage is that white, glistening, slippery stuff that lines the ends of our bones, right? And that's also the substrate that when it breaks down, it leads to arthritis. And there are some new innovative technologies that, frankly, we didn't have at the time when Solomon was playing. And these were predictably career-ending injuries. Now we have these technologies where through a minimally invasive surgery, where arthroscopically we go in with a small camera, we can take a small piece of cartilage, healthy cartilage, from an area that doesn't bear any load. And we can actually grow that cartilage in a laboratory, have it grown on a piece of collagen, a membrane, and come back in a procedure where through a very small incision, we can implant it back to the areas that are missing cartilage. When you think about it, we're not going to do a joint replacement in a professional or even highly active individual who's not age appropriate. So these technologies, in some respects, almost sound like science fiction. We never had the ability to treat cartilage because it has no intrinsic ability to heal. Now we have this technology called MACI, which allows us to take a small sample, culture it, grow it on a membrane, come back and resurface it. And we now have evidence in a number of athletes and active individuals who are getting back to their trade, their craft, the things they love by 6 to 9 months, typically after having their areas of cartilage disease treated.
Now, I know for a lot of listeners, they're obviously not necessarily athletes, so that may not apply to them. But I'm wondering for, the regular person out there that's trying to remain active as they get older and maybe dealing with some of these issues, does this MACI procedure also help them to the same degree that it could help an athlete?
Yeah, just, here we sit at Radio Row at pre-Super Bowl, and we have athletes on our mind. But I would tell you that the typical patient is someone who desires to be active. They tend to be relatively young, but they suffer pain and loss of function due to these cartilage defects. And they are not really age appropriate for anything else like a replacement. So it's that middle zone, if you will, of individuals who have very few options. And this procedure, the MACI procedure, offers hope and more than hope. When we look at our outcomes, we're finding 75 to 85% of these people go back to their pre-injury state where they can then be active. And, truth be told, most of us are just interested in being aerobic, getting on a bike, maybe doing yoga, playing golf, skiing. It isn't all about professional football. It's about just being active, engaging in life. And these cartilage problems can take people out where they're sitting on the sidelines, if you will, and can't participate until we find some way to alleviate their pain.
Yeah, and I know, I don't necessarily have issues with my knee, but I do have an uncle who had knee surgery a couple of years ago and doesn't necessarily have sort of the full range of motion. Is this something that I can, do further research into to see if maybe this procedure would potentially help him out?
Yeah, absolutely. Not knowing where your uncle lives, the first place is to just try to find a place to go and a competent orthopedic surgeon who can help him. And probably the best place is just to go to www.maci.com. That's MACI.com. And the reason he would go there is because there's a list of orthopedic surgeons who can they've been pre-vetted, competently evaluate him. And keep in mind, MACI or cartilage transplantation, as we're talking about, may not be the solution for him, but that doesn't mean there aren't other options. And, this falls into a very specific place to replace damaged cartilage. But as you talked about, those who are out injury with the NFL on both sides of the equation, that may not be a cartilage problem. That may be a ligament or soft tissue problem trying to get these individuals back. Your uncle may be suffering from a very different thing, and it indeed might be cartilage related.
Yeah, I think it's certainly something that I'll forward to him and look into and see if it's something that he may need to do further research on. But I really do appreciate you guys coming on and joining with me and explaining this procedure and how it could be beneficial. Where's a place where people can get in contact with you, or a place where they can get more information on this?
Aaron, I would say probably the easiest place to go would be to the website, which is www.maci.com. MACI. That's the abbreviation for this cartilage transplant procedure.
All right. Okay. I will definitely forward that, and people can check that out in the description below on this video. And I appreciate you, Dr. Cole. I appreciate you, Solomon, for joining me today and providing this insight and talking a little football with me as well.
You're welcome, Aaron. Take care.
Great speaking with you.
So, guys, I want to appreciate Solomon Wilcots and Dr. Brian Cole for joining me on today's episode. If you're interested in learning more about the MACI procedure, you can do so by going to maci.com. That's MACI.com, and find out more information and find a specialist in your area. So, guys, that will do it for us here on Locked On Falcons. Tomorrow's episode, I will kind of be answering another listener question, or at least another listener sent an email talking about how they still weren't over Super Bowl 51. And as I do every year around this time, going back the last couple of years, we revisit that old topic, and we'll get my thoughts on sort of how much, it's still lingering in the back of my mind. And we'll see if we can kind of relate it to the current issues going on. We won't go too far down the rabbit hole for those of you that are, not necessarily wanting to bring back those old memories, but we'll kind of see if we can relate it to, the Arthur Smith regime and what's going on with the Falcons currently and whatnot, and sort of the lessons learned from that Super Bowl that we're still learning from. So that's the plan for right now for tomorrow's episode. And then, of course, next week we can get my thoughts on, the big game and the results that we'll know, and do a mock draft Monday. And of course, the mock draft Monday is also an opportunity to do a Monday mailbag. So if you want to send in your questions for future Q&As and that episode, of course, you can do so by hitting me up on Twitter or Facebook at Locked On Falcons, via email at LockedOnFalcons@mail.com, or you can leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel, guys. And before we duck out of here, want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen. As always, recommend your second listen being Locked On Hawks, Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On Braves, and of course, Locked On Bets podcast, where handicapping expert Lee Sterling is giving you the lowdown on his daily picks, his blowout specials, and his lock of the day. And of course, he's got you covered for all the best props for this Super Bowl 56 matchup between the Rams and Bengals. So, guys, appreciate you for tuning in for another episode of Locked On Falcons. Appreciate it. Till then.